Rise by Teese Snyder. Chapter 41. Change of Plans. Derek Riggs, California, 2018. Being up in Corey's tree fort was the first solid night's sleep I'd had since the infection spread. It reminded me of the countless nights I'd spent sleeping in the fort I'd made when I was younger, either because I felt the need to slip away from home or prepare for the end of the world with my friends Sebastian and Matthew, staking out the area and hiding away from everything else. It was like our own world. We made the rules, and we felt like we were in control. Scouting the forest for any sign of anything, living off the land and the supplies we'd stolen, practicing fighting, shooting, and all around, living the life we wanted to without the imposing judgment of our parents or anybody else. I missed those days. I was happy then. Though if you'd asked someone who knew me back then, they'd likely have said I'd never been happy a single day in my life. But that's because most people like to only see things for what's clear as day on the outside, and for what's buried deep inside of themselves. I didn't care if they understood then, and I certainly didn't care now. But still, it felt good to have some company again. Just like the days before I lost my friends. When I opened my eyes in the morning, my hand was already on my rifle. Instinct, not reaction. But what surprised me about the slit of daylight peeking through the boards of the fort wasn't just that I hadn't gotten up before the sun did. It was that Corey was no longer lying next to me the way he'd fallen asleep, and had remained for the few moments I'd woken up throughout the night to double-check for the sound of moans or sight of ghouls. Instead, the fort was empty. The coast was clear, and he had somehow managed to creep away from my side without stirring me awake. I didn't know whether to be impressed or concerned. I sat up and slid my helmet on as I craned my neck around the fort to double-check that there weren't any nooks or crannies he might be hiding in. Nothing. He was gone. And it wasn't until I spotted the rope ladder still hanging down from the top of the tree fort that I saw there was a clear trail I would be able to follow to find him. My feet touched down on the still damp dirt from the morning mist. The birds were singing, the bugs were buzzing, and just in the distance, over by the cabin that Corey had called home before he had to move into the tree fort to sleep at night, the clang of a metal fence opening rang out through the air. I furrowed my brow at the sight, watching as the pen Corey was keeping his infected parents in was opened for them to go ahead and walk right out. Walk right towards him. I moved quickly forward, clutching my rifle at my side, knowing that I wouldn't be able to pull my gun on them without him pulling his on me. But I had no choice. I'd told him what had happened to them. I'd told him that they were undead and that there was nothing that could be done about it. But he hadn't listened. He'd gone to visit them. He'd let them out of their pen, and he'd endangered both of our lives by doing so. I pulled my rifle up and took aim. 2 quick shots rang out across the forest, and the singing birds quickly shut up and scattered. I stopped dead in my tracks, barely believing what had just happened. Corey held his own rifle in his trembling hands. His parents lay motionless on the ground, 1 shot fired into each of their skulls, finally freed from the hell of being ghouls. But it wasn't me who had fired at them. It was him. He had done what was necessary. He had killed the two most important people in his life. And he had done it without crying to me about how he wanted to believe I was wrong. He had done it without asking me to help him or expecting that I would take care of him. He had done it because it needed to be done. Corey bent down and picked up a knapsack by his feet, turning around and wiping away a tear, startled to see me standing only a few meters behind him with my gun in my hand. We stood there for a moment, without saying a word, each of us understanding that because the shots had been fired, it would only be a matter of time until more ghouls came wandering around, looking for whatever had caused the noise. Corey eventually took a few steps forward and held out the knapsack for me to take. "Here," he said, moving towards me, his tone and expression somber, but not defeated. "You said you weren't able to get your creative supplies, so I gathered some stuff together for you," he finished, still holding the knapsack out for me. I stood stunned, completely taken off guard by this kid. Eventually, I reached out and accepted his offer, staring down at the sack full of canned food and dried fruit bars. Thank you," I replied, fastening the bag shut and slinging it over my shoulder. Corey smiled gently, clearly doing his best to keep from crying too hard or feeling too bad. I felt for the kid. That was smart of, it was brave for you to do what you just did. "Why?" "Because most people wouldn't have," I replied, my mind already starting to wander, growing anxious from the inevitable approach of the undead towards where the shots had been fired. "Would you have?" "Yeah. You did the right thing." "It doesn't feel right." "More often than not, that's the case," I exclaimed, fastening my rifle across my shoulder as I prepared my gear for the ride ahead. I'd have to leave soon to reach my destination by sundown, but something about leaving that kid without a proper goodbye nagged at my conscience. "I've never shot a person before. Just deer and rabbits." Not much difference when you think about it, but then again, it's probably best not to think about it too much. "Probably," Corey muttered, losing focus of what we were saying to each other, his mind no doubt drifting back to what he'd just done. "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Are things ever going to get better?" he said, forcing me to choose between being honest with him at the worst time or lying to him because of the pity I felt. I didn't know which to choose, and before I could respond, I heard the distant moan of an approaching ghoul, stumbling through the forest. Corey turned his head in the direction and forgot the question he'd just asked me. But I didn't. "You better get going. They'll form a group soon, and then I'll have to herd them into the river or over the cliffside." "Yeah, you're right," I replied, walking with him to my bicycle, strung up by the tree his fort was built on. I saddled up my gear and fastened everything tight. preparing for another long ride on my way to the cabin up north, waiting for me. Thanks again for your hospitality, I stated, nodding goodbye to him as I slid the visor on my helmet down. "Hey, Derek," Corey exclaimed, stopping me for one more moment before I left. "Yeah." If you ever get the chance, come back and visit sometime, okay? Yeah, sure thing, I replied, knowing well that when I left, I'd never look back. Knowing well that the protocols wouldn't allow a frivolous trip to visit a kid I'd only known for a day. I'd never see him again. I'd never know if he was safe or if every day when he set out to clear the area of ghouls, if he would fall when he wasn't supposed to or be caught off guard by something a kid his age just couldn't see coming. I knew that his life was likely going to end just as he was living in that moment, and that mine would continue on just as I'd lived it for all the years I'd forced myself to be alone. To stay alone, no matter what. So that when the time came, when this time came, I'd be strong enough to survive. I'd be hard enough to endure. And I wouldn't need anyone or anything but myself and the plans I'd made. I knew all of that, looking at his dirty, solemn face. But what I didn't know was how much it would hurt making that choice over and over again. That was something I could never have prepared for. And in that moment, it finally got to me. The loneliness, the solitude, the pain, and the desolation that I had endured to make myself the man I was and turn my back on everyone else. I stared at him, stunned and speechless. And then, just as the group of ghouls began to appear through the rustling trees around us, I said, I decided to do something I never would have imagined I'd do. I changed the plan. I broke the protocols. And I told Corey to hurry up and get the few things he'd need to leave this place and never look back. He was coming with me. To be continued in Risen.